Welcome back to the Gooner Fanzine Arsenal Women podcast. Please do hit like and the subscribe button on YouTube if you're enjoying our content or wherever else you are listening. Arsenal kicked off the defence of their Champions League with a 2-1 defeat to Lyon last night at Meadow Park. Daisy, I don't know if you want to enlighten the listeners on and viewers on your night, but sometimes the football and not the football just go hand in hand, unfortunately.
Yeah, it was definitely one of those nights to forget, I think, in every way. I think if we take the game in itself, if you lost to Lyon on your own, it was just a 2-1 loss to a very good Lyon side. I mean, I was watching them, looking at each individual player and thinking, wow, like the squad that they have is incredible. If you looked at it as one game alone, you maybe wouldn't think it was too bad for Arsenal to narrowly miss out and obviously start the game positively, end up losing the game. It wouldn't be so bad if you took it as a single game. But if we're looking at the bigger picture, obviously it's added to a significant streak of not winning games and also poor performances, major problems. It's all fitting together into a not very nice puzzle. All the pieces are not really fitting at the moment, and it has been quite negative in general. But I will look at the positives. The atmosphere I thought was incredible. The North Bank was very full. I ended up moving over to the East Stand about halfway through because I physically couldn't move, and it's been a while since we've had that in the North Bank. But got to praise Meadow Park. I think it we brought the atmosphere no matter what. Obviously rewarded with that goal quite early on. But yeah, the atmosphere was great. The fans were incredible. But some clearly some bigger issues that we're gonna get into.
That's interesting because the chat online and sort of in the media is why are these games at Meadow Park? But even though I guess the result didn't go Arsenal's way, I mean, my reading was a smaller pitch on this occasion didn't help Arsenal in terms of how well Lyon were pressing. And I actually thought, look at the away leg in Lyon's on a bigger pitch, obviously the home legs at the Emirates. But Adam Salter put up a tweet, and sort of all of Arsenal's home games against Lyon are decided by fine margins. The away games, Arsenal thrashed Lyon. It's a funny one because Izzy, I guess you come away with the result, and I was trying to be positive because I tweeted and said, look, Arsenal won't face a better side than Lyon unless they get through to the knockout stages, and I stand by that. Not just because of Bayern Munich getting battered by Barcelona, but the optimistic side of me says Lyon were very, very good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I found myself saying to a couple of people last night that I think that Leon side could win the whole thing. They're kind of back to that kind of European giant stature that we've known of them in the past, and maybe they've lost their way over the last couple of seasons slightly. I mean, obviously they haven't dropped very far, but they just looked in absolutely scary form last night. Every single player, as you said, Daisy had something different to bring to the pitch and had their own threats. I particularly enjoyed watching Tarsian. I thought she was like, yeah, incredibly threatening and as someone you really wouldn't want to come up against on a football pitch. And I think Beth Mead discovered that the hard way in a couple of those challenges. But yeah, I think look, it's a 2-1 loss. It could have been worse. I think there's a lot of people saying that Leon probably should have scored more goals and maybe they should have done. But if you come away with that scoreline, it's not the worst. And if you want to look at it positively, as you said, Arsenal should and hopefully will win their next few league phase games and they'll be back up in the table where they should be. But yeah, not a brilliant start to the defence of their Champions League trophy.
Yeah, I think we all knew if Arsenal won last night, there would still have just been criticism of why haven't you been doing this anyway? And I think now there's almost more clarity, and actually Arsenal have problems here. Arsenal have some consistent problems, but maybe less so in terms of mentality because we're seeing these defeats, against a variety of sides. And I think, sort of last season's Arsenal maybe go to Man City and beat them, but there's something up at the moment, and I think that's probably the issue. And for me, it's just falling behind Chelsea early on again. This just feels like quite a normal Arsenal women's season. Unfortunately, if you forget the fact that Arsenal won the Champions League, and you just consider this does just fall into a trend of a lot of Arsenal seasons, unfortunately. And I guess, Daisy, when we were hoping to kick on, this is what seems like the issue is maybe that's not been the case.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you think about the fact that we had to play Leon, that's probably not the most ideal game for you to have to play when you're in this rut or you're in a streak of not being able to win games or not being able to resolve the problems. I think we've addressed some of those issues, and I'm sure like we've gone over it. But obviously, leadership seems to be a huge one, and also for many reasons, the presence of Leah Williamson. You can't say that it is one player that makes or breaks a team, but what she brings clearly is sort of key to what Arsenal need, whether it's ball progression, whether it's leadership on the pitch. I do think we realistically made two poor mistakes defensively yesterday that probably cost us the game. And there were some bright sparks, I thought, in the attack, especially towards the start of the game. But then as the game goes on, I just don't see a lot from Arsenal in terms of attacking, and it's not clicking in the way that I thought it would. I think there's a lot of problems. We talked so much last season when we were building and trying to actually say how we could be successful. We talked about relationships on the pitch between different players and how that would make the system work and how we would be able to build on that. And then we just haven't been able to do that. We seem to be changing. People are saying we need to change the team, but then when we do that, we don't have any rhythm, we don't have any consistency, and we can't really build from anything because we've got problems in a lot of different areas. So it's kind of a really difficult task for Renee Sagers because she's not just looking at, oh, Arsenal can't score goals or Arsenal have got defensive mistakes. It's almost everything. The midfielder, there's complaints over players not starting there. We're not scoring as much or taking as many chances as we like, and also we're defensively not able to play out from the back, defend set pieces, score from set pieces. So it really is that's why I think we're viewing it as a crisis. It's because when you look at it, there's so many factors that are a problem for Arsenal right now.
Yeah, I look at this Brighton game sort of coming towards the end of the block, and I'm just thinking Kyra Cooney-Cross has to start. Probably Manu Zinsberg or Annika Borba has to start. We have to see, because if not, it's just something more is going on here, and that does Renee Slagers trust these players who are outside of this preferred 11? And it's interesting tactically yesterday because I thought Kim Little and Mariona Caldente, again, as has been the trend, neither of them were awful, but Lyon were just better. And you look at Arsenal's building from the back. Is there a lack of adaptability there? And every goal kick was going short, and Arsenal were working their way forward. There was not one where I thought, what about sending this long, playing up to Alessia Russo? Fair enough, it's Wendy Renard, and I get Lyon just have every base covered, and that's what makes sort of Arsenal's semi-final win so remarkable about them. But building from the back was so clearly an issue. Lyon's press was so clearly so good. Maybe this is where Arsenal are lacking that adaptability.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, Renee Sleger spoke about it afterwards, and someone in the press conference asked her about whether they spoke at half time about sending maybe some balls over the top, because that seemed to be the slightly more effective method of getting the ball up to Alessia Russo and up to those forwards. And she did say that they had had that conversation, and I did see them trying to do it a little bit, but I think Arsenal really struggled down the wing with where Chloe Kelly was playing. She was sort of unable to get much action there or put her usual balls across the box, which can be so effective normally. And it's just difficult to get. If you can't get the ball to Alessia Russo, she can't really do a lot. I did think Frida Marnham's press at the front was excellent. She was probably one of my highlights to watch last night. I think that she was definitely the right choice in that number 10 position, and I'm glad that she did play for the whole match. I think she did in the end. And swapping Russo for Blackstenius, that was something that I think we were having a discussion in the press box about. Hopefully you don't bring on both of them, because Russo in the 10 wasn't going to be that effective last night, as we've seen in previous weeks. So I was glad from that perspective that Renee Slegers adapted it slightly. I guess she did adapt as well in terms of that left back position, bringing Taylor Hines into the starting lineup instead of Katie McCabe, after maybe a slightly questionable McCabe performance against Manchester City, which we'll probably come on to. But I did think Taylor Hines had a good game. She was good to watch. She had good pace and intensity, and I think that it did work against Lyon. But yeah, I'll be really interested to see what that lineup looks like come Sunday, and whether we're going to see, anyone starting who's usually only getting a few minutes here or there, and that's what we want. That's what everyone wants. Everyone wants to see these players playing, not sitting on the bench. So yeah, it'll be really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, my really rogue theory that I came up with on the train back from Manchester was recall Michelle Agermang in January and start her up front. But I think that's a little bit too far, and I still think her development there long term is for the best. But when you look at actually Agermang, Lena Hurtig, of course, when Arsenal don't have that sort of profile to throw on and sort of lump the balls into the box, and I think that is a bit of an issue. I still look at the spine of the team, the physicality, the height, sort of not being quite there. So Taylor Hines came in, Daisy, and I thought this was the right decision, but we continue to see, because Rene's played such a settled side at the start of the season, you're bringing players in from the cold, and you're bringing a player who was playing in a lower mid-table side for the most part at Liverpool up against Lyon in for her first start. And this is where that management and lack of rotation is proving costly, because she just didn't quite look up to the level last night. And I think Taylor Hines is a very good player. You're asking a lot of her, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where I think we're looking at a problem of what I just said. How do you fix the problem but at the same time not cost the team. And I think everyone is saying if a player performs badly, rightly so, that they be substituted or we replace that player. And Rene did just that. As he said, I did think Katie McCabe was one of the weaker performances at Manchester City. So rightly so, Taylor Hines was expected to start, but if you do that, you like you say, you then disrupt the rhythm, and I don't think there has been any rhythm at all in that defence. I think we've obviously seen strong individual performances. I think that's the same across the whole team. You know, you pointed out Mariona and Kim Little have had solid individual performances, but as a system, it's not working. So I don't think, as you say with Taylor Hines, it's the same problem. I think it's not the individuals always that are the issue. It just doesn't seem to be working as a collective. And I think that is a huge issue because it comes down to tactics. And even if you change Taylor Hines for McCabe, if you bring in Lotta instead of Katie Reid, if you change the midfield slightly and you have Pullover instead of Marnham, I still think we're having the same issues. I thought in terms of the way we played yesterday through the midfield, we scored the goal from there, and that was our best chance at creating anything. So the fact that we then decided to do that less and Lyon obviously pressed really well, and we went to reverted to playing it out to Chloe Kelly, as Izzy said, that didn't work. I was surprised in that because we were doing quite well at playing it through Lyon and finding the spaces, and Marnham did really well at that too. So there's so many interesting points because I just can't pinpoint what it is that is the issue. We can talk about changing players, but effectively, is that going to work long term? Are we going to see the results? I really don't know.
Talk to me about the atmosphere when Alessia Russo puts Arsenal in front, Izzy, on a positive note, and just how trademark Beth Mead the build-up play was as well. It was just brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Beth Mead fan, and I think that yesterday she had another one of those performances where she slightly proves that her doubters a little bit wrong because I thought she did do well. Her press was good, and she was quite often winning the ball back when Leon were trying to play out. So I did think that she had a good evening, and yeah, just I mean, just classic trying to dribble it through a few players at the edge of the box, and then ending up getting it to Russo. Yeah, very vintage Beth Mead and brilliant from Russo. And yes, as Daisy said, the atmosphere last night I did think was absolutely superb. The North Bank just did not stop singing the whole way through the game. To be fair to Lyon, they did have a very small pocket of fans in the
Mm.
south side, but and they were making a bit of noise, but it was nothing compared to the North Bank. And even along the side at Meadow Park, there was separate chanting going on there, almost competing with the North Bank. So yeah, fantastic atmosphere, and I do think that whilst Meadow Park maybe isn't set up in terms of practicality for maybe broadcasting and covering the game and all that element, and maybe not such a nice changing room for the players, for example, the facilities that, but you can't beat that atmosphere, and it's just not quite there at the Emirates. So I do think that did give Arsenal maybe the best fighting chance they could have had last night.
Mm. Yeah, interesting. The two goals conceded in quick succession, I think, is another one that tells you a little bit about where this Arsenal side are at. I mean, I know Daphne van Domselaar's not been fully fit coming into the season. I know Annika Borber's had a spell, I think, just before the season of not being fully fit. She's not really been named in the squad. Manu Zinsberger over her instead. So seems a little bit of a weird transfer so far, unless she's really willing to bide her time. I wonder if there was an element of Borba coming in thinking that Zinsberger would move on, and Zinsberger, he's got the credit in the bank to stay. But if Van Domselaar comes out, I'd be intrigued to see who's first choice because she doesn't look herself at the minute, Daisy. And when your goalkeeper, I talked on the Guardians pod yesterday about how good Fallon Tullis-Joyce is and the different levels she's taken United to. Now, I think there was an element of that with Van Domselaar, but when your goalie, you've already said we're missing Williamson, and then when your goalkeeper doesn't look herself, and it really then puts the nerves in the defence, and this was just a poor error. These things happen, don't they? But I think then the second goal, probably Katie Reid could have headed it to Steph Catley. She could have gone back to Van Domselaar. Mariana's caught in the press. That it's just all of the goals seem to sum up exactly where Arsenal are at the moment.
Yeah, it's a huge mentality issue, and the hardest part of being a coach, especially Renee Sagers being an up and coming coach and not sort of having, well, she does have some experience, but not having as much and being younger, is she has to learn to navigate these situations as they come about. It is the hardest thing, to get past that. Obviously, we had sort of the luck of the new bounce of having a new manager, and that kind of got us out the rut that we were in last season or at the start of the season, not so positively, but it is the hardest, thing to do. And obviously, you can look at the different factors that play into that. Like you said, Van Domselaar hasn't been the same since. Obviously, she was unfit towards the end of last season anyway. She started the final, played brilliantly, don't get me wrong, but but was definitely not fully fit at all. Couldn't even take the goal kicks at some point. So Arsenal definitely rushed her back in there because it was make or break. If we're looking at it long term, it's not going to be able. You're not going to be able to do that every single game just because you're playing Lyon. You can't play an injured player. We should have sort of thought about that and recruited a little bit better. The same with Leah Williamson. That goes back to issues of not recruiting someone who is like Leah Williamson, who can come in, who can, be the same kind of profile. We have looked at other players, Kadina, we've kept them in, Katie Reid, but none of them, and not by their own fault, and none of them are going to be a like for like replacement for Leah Williamson. But I think a lot of it is coming down to major issues with injuries, recruitment, and this is a long term thing, not just over the summer. I'm talking for years where we've fallen behind, and Chelsea, we're not going to be able to catch up with Chelsea just because we've won a Champions League trophy. There's obviously issues behind that, but yeah, long term we do have some problems that we need to address, and it is maybe a longer term project. You don't just kind of move the manager on and say, well, that didn't work. I hope that's not the case at all, but I hope they give her time and they back her, and it's not going to be a reflection of repeating cycles that we've had for so many years now of just not being up to scratch.
Yeah, I mean, just briefly touching, I think moving players on has been an issue across the women's and the men's side at Arsenal for a few years now, and I think that does play a part of it. You're talking about, if you go in and get a big centre back, you're going to have to be brave and move on. And I think there's a lot of players in this squad where there's these emotional and these deep running connections to Arsenal, and I think that makes it harder, and I think that maybe does play a part of it. I also think. I think people are just going to presume I'm referring to Beth Mead here. I'm pleased Arsenal have kept Beth Mead, but I do wonder how much the Viv Miedema situation and how that transpires, perhaps scars the club as well in terms of how hard it is to move players on. But certainly on the men's side, they've had these academy graduates who they just really struggle to sell at a decent price. And you have to be brave ultimately. And, you do see it with these top clubs. And that's maybe another area Arsenal might look at. But it just seems either Renee Slagers doesn't trust her bench or she really, really trusts the starting team. But when the starting team aren't winning, it's hard to make that argument. And I don't know. I don't know if these are two similar games. I thought Arsenal went toe to toe with Manchester City. But again, Izzy, the defensive mistakes, and I think more than anything in the City game, the players not tracking their runners, the wingers not tracking back, the basic errors. I mean, that's always going to worry you when this is a team that's achieved European glory a few months ago.
Yeah, I think it is worrying. I think that a lot of people going into the season probably thought after Arsenal lifted that Champions League trophy that going into the WSL it'd be a little bit of a breeze. Well, not it's never easy, but it would. They've beaten Barcelona on one of the biggest stages in football, so of course they can go to Leeds Sports Village, or of course they can go to the Joy Stadium and get a result. But it's just not quite the case when you're playing week in, week out, and the top end of the WSL is very competitive. But yes, Arsenal did go toe to toe with City. I did think that there was going to be a draw at one point, but then as soon as Iman Benny came on, I did feel she's going to make an impact. And they were saying in commentary about what a kind of threatening player she is and the kind of qualities that she offers, and she did just that. But yeah, for that City goal, I mean, I had the notification on my phone that there'd been a goal before it happened, and I knew as soon as I saw Kasparov running down and Caitlin Ford trailing behind her that was going to be the moment that they were going to score. And yeah, it was a little bit of a tricky watch, I felt, for Arsenal. It just didn't feel like they were ever quite in the game. They were constantly chasing the momentum, and they'd finally get back on with an equaliser, and then it would all be with the favour would be with City. So yeah, I don't quite know. You can't put your finger on one thing that caused that loss that day, but yeah, I think overall there's a few issues across the board.
Yeah, I've seen sort of people say that maybe this was just a knife edge game where City get the rub of the green. I'm not sure. I thought probably City deserved it overall. I know Kelly gets Arsenal back into the game. I've talked a lot about shooting from range. Kelly, proving it. Mariona nearly scored last night from range as well. But then City's goals, one of them's really well worked, but the issue for me of the first goal is like I've watched a fair bit of City this season, and those overlapping fullback runs, and particularly from Kasparai, it's just what they do. And Shaw is going to meet. It was such a predictable goal, but I think you're also seeing the levels here of how Khadija Shaw will just find ways of scoring goals, and they just create for her no matter what. Whereas on the other side, you're seeing Alessia Russo dropping in. She's moving wide. This was brought up in the press conference, and you've got to be getting the best out of your strikers to be winning the league. And I don't feel like, I know Russo's taken a really nice goal last night, but we speak so much about her good hold-up play, but it still feels like, why is she doing all of this off the ball as well. And I just think Khadija Shaw is a shining light of just a terrifying player to defend against, Daisy.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if you look at the ways that other teams in the leagues are getting the most out of their strikers, like you say, you could look at obviously Khadija Shaw at City, but also look at Aggie Beaver-Jones at Chelsea. The way that they're creating chances is clearly they have that strength over Arsenal. I've looked at the different ways that Arsenal appear to be scoring goals, especially if it's Russo that's on the end of it. Yesterday was a fantastic, like you said, from Beth Mead. Things like that, creativity, moments of like Marioni used to do that so much last season, find a pass in behind, or Kim Little finding the pass in behind, finding crosses. We also do overlapping fullback so well, yet, I think there's the ways that we've not been able to put those crosses in, low driven crosses as often has cost us not creating chances. Again, I felt a lot of it has been, especially in the past two games against Lyon and City, reminiscent of when we would just pass it along the edge of the box, move it along back to the centre back and keep playing it along the box and never actually make nobody making that run, nobody looking for that opportunity. And I think that's what's costing us so much. I thought we did it so well towards the end of last season, and I do think that contributed to the way that we scored goals in the Champions League, but how we got big results in the WSL as well when we needed to. So I'm really concerned that we seem to be going backwards. We seem to be doing less of what we were doing that worked so well, and we seem to be reverting back to poor defensive mistakes. Things like the goals we conceded against Manchester City should be the basics, and I worry that that's coming from a mentality point of view rather than just being lazy or just being complacent. It does just feel like nobody is switched on, nobody is in communication and together, and there's no cohesiveness across the whole unit. And that's a problem that has to be fixed. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to go to any team and win, because every team is going to go in and want to beat Arsenal. Villa did it. They knew what to do. You've seen Manchester City cause us problems just by doing their basics right. And then obviously Lyon as well, just being, I thought that was a different kind of game because I did think that we did better in that. But if we go to Brighton, Chelsea, whoever you go to, they're going to see exactly what Arsenal are doing wrong. And if we continue to allow teams to do that, we're going to be in a problem of never winning any game, which would be a huge problem this season.
Daisy, you're right in and amongst it, literally last night in terms of the fans. I mean, how are they feeling? Because I just feel like the Lisbon buzz has completely worn off almost. And I sat on my train over in Manchester and flicked through my camera roll, and it really cheered me up in terms of what a brilliant weekend, of course, that was. But I almost respect the fans for really being like, no, we need more. We want to be winning the WSL. I said this on the phone to George actually earlier. That it's really funny how Chelsea really want to win the Champions League. We really want to win the WSL, and it's sort of happening the other way around. But I almost feel like fair play to the fans because they've just said this is great, but we've got to be doing more, and we want to be doing it every single season.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the two, like you give a great example there with Chelsea not being able to do in the Champions League and Arsenal not being able to do this. I think that's because you look at the teams and what they have and their strengths, and they sort of mirror the competition that they're able to win. Arsenal can't get continuity, they can't get consistency. Chelsea seem to be able to do that, they find a way. If you flip it the other way around, Chelsea seem to be able to struggle in those big moments at times, especially in the Champions League against those stronger opponents, and they can't go all the way there. But yeah, definitely. I think the fans, obviously, we went into the season really optimistically. As you said, we should have been going into that. We should have been challenging for the WSL. We didn't. I don't think any fans looked at it as thinking it was easy because it was never going to be. Those big games against Man United, Manchester City, Chelsea, we were always going to look at those and think that's going to be a difficult challenge and it could go either way. It's the problem of not being able to put on like the performances that we did where we were going last season and beating Brighton 5-0 at the Emirates. That's the kind of thing I think we were expecting, a bit more in that sense, and that would help towards building confidence and being able to build continuity and get results. The fans seem to, yeah, in some way there is a little bit of sort of less optimism now because I think we're realistic. I think we're honest about the fact that if you do drop points in the WSL, it's hard to get back into it. It really is. It's almost impossible at times to win it because Chelsea just you sit there and you go, well, if Chelsea mathematically drop points here and we get a draw here, and then you think, oh God, we're only 5 games into the season and we're already thinking about who's going to drop points and how we're gonna make ground up on people, and we shouldn't be in that position. So, I mean, the chant for Lisbon doesn't seem to be going anywhere. We also did 1-0 to the champions yesterday, so there definitely is still some. Obviously, you're not going to get over that quickly, but there was also a bit of sort of being more realistic in a way that actually we may be struggling more than we thought we were going to.
Yeah, if Arsenal fail to beat Brighton, I think Adam Salter tweeted saying it'd be the first time Arsenal women or ladies go 5 games winless in all competitions since, off the top of my head, 1991. I'm going to get that checked, but I mean, that is really saying something because I think, I certainly back Renee Slagers at the moment, and I'm not sitting here saying we're going to get rid of her, but if that's a Jonas Eidevall stat, at the start of last season, of course, it didn't even go that far. I think that's what I'm saying. And Arsenal, it's Brighton and Benfica. They need these sort of games. Brighton will be tough. I think everyone's grateful that, for obvious reasons, Kafaji and Agyemang can't play. But it's been a long first block of games, Izzy. I don't know how you found it, but you look at the Premier League and it's normally like 3 games, international break, another 3 or 4. This has been a long old block, and I think Arsenal would be really grateful to get through to the internationals.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think you're right. It has felt like a pretty long block, and especially with the Champions League, last night there's another one next week. It's just it's a lot of games, and it's a lot of games that Arsenal will want to forget at the end of the day, and they'll want to go away, spend time with international teams, and those who are injured maybe a little bit more recovery time, and then those who don't go to their international teams more time at the club, and just come back refreshed and start again. And each block, I know Rennie Slegers often talks about how they have discussions before each block about what they want to achieve, and they haven't achieved what they wanted to in this one, but there'll probably be different conversations going into the next, given kind of where they are in each competition now. Then they've just got to have a rethink, I think, and just really kind of come up with some other options, and come up and become a bit more adaptable. As you said earlier, it really is difficult to watch when you're kind of screaming. Yeah, you've got to be able to be adaptable and just kind of get back to those winning ways. Arsenal know they can do it. They've had periods of consistency in the past, but coming up against Brighton this weekend, they lost to Brighton last time out, and Brighton worked out the weaknesses that time. What's to say that they can't do it again? So, yeah, I think that Arsenal really need to tighten things up. And as you mentioned earlier, Leah Williamson will come back probably some point in the next couple of blocks. She'll return to training, and her leadership is so valuable. But you can't rely on one player. And Arsenal have been through seasons with more injuries than this, and got better results than this. So yeah, it's something that Renee Slegers is going to have to really, really think about, and she is kind of learning on the job, and we'll see where we end up come the international break.
Do you know, that's a really good point because Arsenal have one player out. You think of that campaign when they made the Champions League semi-finals with all of those injured players. They got, lucky in terms of getting to the final with Van Domselaar was the only doubt, I think, in terms of Arsenal's final against Barcelona. But there aren't really any excuses on, apart from if people, fair enough, want to moan about transfers and squad utilisation. But Arsenal have one injury. And if that one injury is going to be destabilising, perhaps it wasn't a couple of years ago because Arsenal were able to adapt and overcome and reach those, semi-finals, and of course would have wanted to go on further. But it is actually a pretty much a clean bill of health for Arsenal. But it's just maybe those little bits: Van Domselaar not being fully fit, Kelly perhaps not being fully fit. And of course Williamson, showing how much that Arsenal miss her. And that Brighton game you mentioned, I think that's when I did worry for future seasons about Arsenal's mentality, is when Arsenal lost to Villa and Brighton in between. I know they ended up beating United, but in between the semi-final and the final, and thinking actually you can't be doing this if you're wanting to compete across all competitions. And I think that was the first sign of thinking this isn't great for the future. And I know those games probably seemed really funny as we were partying in Lisbon, Daisy, but maybe that was just a little bit of a sign that Arsenal just dropped the ball a little bit. And also I remember that, almost the B team came in against Villa and struggled because they hadn't been playing. The first team comes back against Brighton, all know they're going to be playing in the Champions League final, basically. So then again, the mentality to beat Barcelona was brilliant, but perhaps I think Izzy's made the point. It's a lot easier to know exactly what you need in a final than when you're playing against some of these smaller opposition and then having to, to turn it back up against Lyon, against the Manchester City. I don't know what you think of that.
Yeah, I think the biggest frustration is going on from what Izzy said. It's in those games. I think Villa is a prime example for me because sometimes you go into games with a plan, and Rene will know that, and it doesn't work, or they don't set up exactly the way you think they're going to set up, which is what happened with Villa. They managed to stop Arsenal from playing through the midfield. I think the frustration from the fans and also, in general is we then didn't change anything we didn't change anything enough. We didn't make those changes. We can play different ways. We can play different styles of football. Rene surely knows we're not just going to go for one thing and if it doesn't work, well, we've lost the game. We can't be thinking like that. We have to be thinking not only certain players are going to come off the bench and make an impact, but the system needs to change. The way that we try and create chances, get back in the game, not concede, all of that needs to work together, and it needs to be it is a mentality thing. I've seen a lot of the way that Chelsea play in the way that they defend their titles and they continue to win is because they don't just look at it as, oh, this hasn't worked, we've lost this game. They look at it like, right, how do I win this game now, and what do I change it? It's not just let's just bring another player on. It's let's actually overload in this area. Let's actually make sure we're defensively solid. And Arsenal, I don't think, have done that. You can win a one-off game, of course. Everyone's mind was on we need to win in Lisbon, but we can't use that as an example for the league, in my opinion, because it's completely different. Teams are going to come and know how to play against you when they consistently play against you, and they know sort of how to expose your weaknesses. So let's make sure that we don't do that again then. Let's not continuously do the same thing when we know teams are going to expose that. So it is definitely coming from so much frustration, but at the same time, you almost think, well, Rene and the squad should be seeing this as well. So what's not going right in that sense, and why are we not changing it too much? Is it just too many issues together? I don't think it's a personnel issue. I don't think it's just Leah Williamson or Van Domselaar, that definitely doesn't help, but I think it's more of a system. We need to change it at times, and we need to figure out where those weaknesses are. And there are players in our squad like Kyra Cooney-Cross who can help to stop those weaknesses at times. And I think that's why people are frustrated with personnel, not just that they're not getting game time, but they have the ability to correct those issues that Arsenal are persistently struggling with.
Quick question before we run out of time. It's finished, by the way, 21 Chelsea 1. So neither English side after the greatest start. Manchester United play Vålerenga. We're recording this on Wednesday evening. That gets underway in about 20 minutes. But what are we changing for Sunday afternoon against Brighton? Not a 12 o'clock kickoff, which is excellent. Anything radical, Izzy? Give me something radical.
Well, firstly, if it's not 12 o'clock kickoff, we're not getting brunch in the Emirates. So that's one thing you've got to be a bit upset about.
Oh, I
Um,
know.
Something radical to change. I think goalkeeper change. I think that this is one for Zinsberger or Borba, and I think that I would go Zinsberger personally, just because she's a known quantity with the players and they've had more game time with her. And yeah, I think bring her in. Van Domselaar's had a couple of confidence knocks now, and she doesn't look herself. And I mean, potentially taking her off does then not help her confidence. But I think if there's the right conversations had there, then it could be a good decision. So that's something radical that I'd like to see.
Yeah, I'm looking at maybe Steph Catley needing a rest in terms of her playing each game so far. I think Cooney Cross has to start. And I agree, either of the two other goalkeepers just take a little bit of pressure off of Daphne Van Domselaar. We're starting to get into the sort of the midweek and weekend games grind, international breaks coming up soon, and maybe yeah, I don't know. But then also, whatever Arsenal do now, they're bringing players in out of the cold. But also, the more you wait, the harder that's going to be. What are you thinking about, Daisy? Are you giving us a back five, or we go that far?
Honestly, it is really hard because I think that with Marnham as well, like obviously, as you said, she's been great, but I do think Arsenal have to change something in that midfield and the way that they set up. I'm really keen to see. I want to just see once and for all if that Mariona Little Cooney Cross midfield does work with Mariona in the 10 and Little and Kairos and Cooney Cross, sorry, sort of sitting behind. I think we've spoken so much about it. It still hasn't happened. I feel like it's been Pullover and Mariona and Little, but I think once and for all, we need to see if that sort of fixes some of the issues. But I agree with you guys. I think there's some changes that are needed elsewhere as well. But making too many, I think you're then going to be in the same predicament of you're going to disrupt the rhythm. But we have to change something, and we need to see something in terms of the system and the way we're playing changing drastically.
Well, myself and Izzy will be there on Sunday for our usual Greener fanzine coverage. Also delighted to say that we'll have Susie out in Lisbon for the Benfica game next week with her camera for all of her brilliant photography. Some great shots last night from Susie of Alessia Russo's goal and the celebration, which are up on social media, and I'm sure there'll be more to come. So yeah, looking forward to that. A couple more games and then the international break. England have got a game in Derby, which I'm very excited about
Yeah, I
against
bet
the
you're chuffed.
Matildas. So yeah, plenty of Arsenal representation. I've slammed my fist down for accreditation there for Jamie in the halfway line. So yeah, I enjoy these episodes, which is probably a bad thing because Arsenal lost their last two games, but there's something about sitting and dissecting it and working out what to do better. And I think, Daisy, talking about these things probably helps.
Yeah, definitely. It's almost therapy for us to get it out. But there's we could probably film an hour and a half episode of just talking about what it is because there are lots of different things. But yeah, it makes for a more interesting podcast when Arsenal aren't perfect, I guess. Let's look on the bright side in that
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, pleasure as always. I'll see you both on Sunday.